Good morning, everybody. Welcome in to another episode of Morning Glory. I should really stop singing the intros. Not even because anyone else has said I should. I just find it quite irritating myself, to be honest. And I don't know why I do it. I don't know why I decide to just burst into song. I mean, what can I say? I must just be a musical person. Pity God didn't decide to give me a fucking voice that can sing, you know? Decided to bless me with a tone-deaf ass motherfucker. Anyway, good morning. Hello, welcome into another episode of Morning Glory. We're here again. Guys, today we're doing something a little bit different, okay? But first, let's just have a quick chat. How are we all doing? Oh, I actually have some new information for you all that I want to birth. I am on my journey of trying out gluten-free and dairy-free. Because obviously in a previous episode, I did mention that I obviously struggle with psoriasis, and I mentioned that I started taking vitamin D tablets, and I asked you guys to let me know in the comments on YouTube if you have any other recommendations for things I should try that might help me get it under control, because I'd rather try and exhaust a few options before shelling out of a ton of money and going to a dermatologist, you know? So a few people did mention that obviously it does come down to diet, which I knew this. But I did search what specific foods, and it ended up being a lot of the foods that I eat on a general weekly basis, to be honest, like things like eggs. Obviously, gluten, dairy, they're kind of a given. Tomatoes, that's no surprise for me because tomatoes bloat me to filth, right? So yeah, basically I saw this, nearly had a spiral, nearly had a breakdown, right? Thinking that my life was over and I was going to be hungry for the rest of my life. But I decided to rewire my brain. And instead, I went on Asda. I did a food delivery, which I never do. I did a food delivery of a bunch of stuff. I literally typed in dairy-free, gluten-free, free from whatever the fuck. And I just ordered a bunch of things. So this is currently a coffee, but it's not a coffee with normal milk. It's oat milk. And to be honest, guys, there is definitely a difference. I'm not about to sit here and say to you all that there's not a difference, right? There's a significant difference, especially in the aftertaste. But it's not a bad difference. It's just going to be something that I'm going to have to get used to, because obviously I'm so used to my day-to-day, 2 times a day coffees. So yeah, I do think that the only difficult thing I'm going to have is bread. I love bread, and I've heard from many people, and I've also bought some now, that gluten-free bread is just not the same, just doesn't work the same. So that might be a difficulty for me. But I think even, guys, at the very least, just changing my milk and not having, the cow's milk and going for a oat milk option, I think that's going to benefit me a lot, because I just know dairy's not good for me. I just know it. And I have milk specifically. Milk, butter, cheese. I have them all so often. I have eggs daily, right? I know they're not going to be very good for me either, even though eggs are my true love, but sometimes we've got to break up with the things that aren't serving us, Oh my God, that really leads us on well to what we're doing today in today's episode. So let me just have a quick sip and I'll be back. So for today's episode, I decided to do something that I've been wanting to do for a while. Obviously, if you're familiar with me from my main channel, because obviously this is on the second channel, then you'll know that I started off doing music reactions. That was obviously before that I was doing fun things, but when my channel really started to grow and build and I really started to take it seriously, it was when I was doing music reactions, and I used to love doing music reactions. The reason why I stopped for the most part, don't get me wrong, there's the odd one here and there that I do tend to do, generally is Taylor Swift related. So that will be happening again for Tortured Poets, okay? But I obviously decided to stop doing music reactions mainly because of copyright. It got very stressful. Often would just get copywritten, and it's such a shit feeling when you've spent so long making something so good, and then it goes up and it goes out to the people and then gets strucken down or blocked or demonetized or all the things within like the first half an hour. Like, it's a certain feeling about just, wasting your time. So I did in fact stop doing music reactions, but that did not mean that I stopped enjoying music and wanting to consume a bunch of music, right? And I've been trying to figure out a way in which I can still indulge here on a platform with you guys, so we can actually discuss like music and like albums specifically, because I'm such an album person. I love when an album comes out, I love listening from top to bottom over and over and over and over, and really dissecting and analysing songs and lyrics and production choices and like all those things, right? So I decided, because I've been watching a lot of like video essay kind of content where like a person kind of like talks about a subject. A really good creator that I'm loving at the minute is Nicole Raffi. She does a bunch, and it's not always like related to like music or things like that. Like, it literally could be anything. But she'll talk at length. And I mean, you guys know, if you've tuned into the podcast before, I can talk, right? I have no trouble talking, especially on my own. I can handle a conversation with me and this camera, right? And this microphone, I really can. So I decided I wanted to try my hand at a sort of video essay kind of vibe. I don't want to call it a review, and I hope I've not put review in like the title of this episode. I'm thinking more deep dive, right? Because this is not going to be a review in the way of like me critiquing it, because I have no merit to be critiquing anyone's work. Like, I'm not in the music field. I have no business, okay? But I do love going through lyrics, and I love dissecting lyrics and just taking my own meaning from songs. So I decided that's what I was going to try today. And what better album to start with than Eternal Sunshine by the one and only Ariana Grande. When I'm recording this, it came out like 3 days ago, right? So I have been busy. The other day I sat down and I've got a bunch of notes, guys. I'm talking lengthy notes on all these songs. I sat down at my computer and got to writing, which I never do, and I don't usually find enjoyment in. Like, throughout uni, hated doing it. Hated essays, right? But no, I got to writing. And what I think we're going to do is we're going to go through track by track. I'm going to talk about things that I like, things that I maybe don't like. I'm going to break down a load of the lyrics and like really go into the nitty gritty of like what I'm taking from the story. All of this is just my opinion, and it's very subjective to me. And I do believe that's a beautiful thing that comes with music, as Ariana did mention in her Zane Lowe interview. Like, obviously, when an artist puts out music, I think they are able to just be like, you know what, it's not mine anymore. I took what I needed to take out of this music and the creating process, and then as soon as it's out, it's the people's to decide what they want to take from it, whether that be good or bad, and I think that's beautiful. So, although I'm going to be talking at length about the album, I urge you to also let me know, if you're watching this on YouTube visually, I'd love to know your thoughts on some of these songs and what you take from them, because I'm not saying I'm right. This is just what I'm taking, So I just wanted to get that out there and make that very clear. But yeah, so we're going to go through each track by track, and we're going to talk at length. And then I decided to round it up. I've got a few thoughts on the project as a whole, and I thought we could also rank the album as of right now, because obviously, like I said, it is still new. So there's still a good amount of growth and like whatever to be had with the album. But I do already sense that having just a few days with it, it kind of has helped me decipher how I'm feeling about every track more than it would doing like a first listen on like a reaction kind of thing, So I'm excited. So I suppose let's just crack on in. Obviously, the album title is Eternal Sunshine, obviously a reference to Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, a movie that Ariana has obviously spoken about a lot. I have not seen the movie. I do plan on watching it because she's doing the Lord's work for that movie, right? For the creators of that movie, I'm sure they've had a right spike in views, okay, and downloads. So I will be watching that movie at some point. I'm very, very excited about that. But yeah, so obviously I have been indulging in her interviews. Like, she's done one with Zach Sang, she's done one with Zane Lowe now. She's been doing some promo, she really has. So obviously I've been indulging And I've just wanted to get to know as much as I can about this album because she didn't really give us much. She gave us Yes and obviously now we've got the album, I think we can all agree that that didn't really encapsulate the whole album as a whole. I think it had a great messaging in there, but I think sonically and whatever, it didn't necessarily tell us what the album was going to be like, right? So we obviously start with intro, in parentheses, end of the world. So the first noise that we have, kind of like this whooshing in, knowing obviously where the album goes and like the kind of things that we speak about, I did kind of take that noise. Obviously, it could just be like a nice noise, like a nice little sound effect, but I feel like it was definitely intentional. And I see it being very much like what I imagine a Saturn returning would sound like. Like, if you listen to it again, I feel like that kind of gives that. Like, I feel like, obviously, it's something coming from the distance and it kind of like whooshes past or it whooshes back into something. And I just feel like, obviously, with how, like I said, the album goes and like the topics that we talk about, that would just make sense. As like visually, we're already like into this kind of like space, futuristic, astrological vibe. Obviously, lyrically, we start off with a question, which is obviously, how do I know if I'm in the right relationship? Which, oh my fucking God, how are you about to start your album that way? Like, that is a bullshit statement to come out the gates with. But I think it's such a brilliant choice. And obviously, that comes full circle at the very end of the album, but we'll talk about that when we get to the end of the album. So I, first and foremost, love the fact that we're opening with a question in the intro. There's talk about this interaction and kind of this questioning, like whether the person feels the same about the interaction that she obviously is. It kind of reminded me of very much Enchanted by Taylor Swift, because I feel like lyrically there's a lot of similarities there, like kind of wondering how the person perceived you and said interaction. Like, for example, are they understanding her point of view, or are they judging her like she's judging herself, which I find very interesting, because realistically, even within this intro, we know that she's like obviously in this relationship and she's having presumably this interaction with someone obviously outside of her relationship. And she says like she's been thinking about the interaction for like 5 weeks. And I'm sure there's a level of like internal guilt there that you're thinking about someone who isn't the person that you're, for example, maybe married to. Now, I'm going to try and not allude too much to specific people, just because I don't think we need to. I think we all kind of know what she's going to be referencing, so I don't feel the need to like speak about people specifically. But yeah, that's just kind of what that made me think of. I feel like to begin the album, we are probably still in our marriage. And I imagine this interaction, came with a lot of guilt. I'm judging myself. So like, I wonder if he's also doing the same, because realistically, like, how could you not judge yourself in this situation? Because we're kind of conditioned to think that if you're in a relationship with someone, it's always a negative thing if you're thinking about somebody else, whether that's in a completely platonic sense, but even just lingering on a thought or an interaction for an extended period of time when that person is not the person you're meant to be in love with. Like, there's a societal guilt that creeps in. I feel like we've all had it, I'm sure on some level. This intro also did make me think, because obviously we did start off with this whole interaction thing. Obviously, kind of jumping forward in what we know the album to be about, it does then make me wonder, like, did this interaction make her realize a load of things that maybe were wrong in her relationship? Because we hear that also a lot. I know I have, like, people in my life, like, they have an interaction or they meet somebody, and then that just makes them realize, like, all the things that they deserve from a partner, or all the things that their partner is lacking. And that then is like, well, how am I supposed to get fucking over this? How am I meant to just carry on in this relationship that realistically was fine before I met this person, you know? And I imagine there's a level of like, fuck, I wish I'd never met that person, because then I wouldn't be feeling this way. Like, I'd still, like, very much ignorance is bliss kind of vibes. I feel like you'd be able to continue not knowing any different if you hadn't met this person. So I'm sure there's a level of that subconsciously there. And then I think overall, because obviously the intro is titled, like, in parentheses, end of the world, I think it's very interesting that she decides to close the intro with kind of just wondering if the person that she's with if the world was to end tomorrow, which is obviously something devastating, and obviously in that time, I imagine everyone's going to want like the people they value most in their life. It's interesting to me how she's already questioning whether the person that she's meant to be in a marriage with, whether they would like to see her there. And there's obviously an insane level of doubt there already, and we're only on the intro, you know? And also vice versa, like this is not just one-sided. Like she's very much saying like, I wonder if he wants me there, but also do I even want him there? Which I think that guys, this is the perfect intro, in my opinion. Now, don't get me wrong, it's vastly different to the other intros that we've had from Ariana. I feel like most of the time, they're very much vocals, right? They're vocals out of this world that kind of like ascend us into this world. And I feel like she went for a bit more of a subtle option with this, but that kind of does like emulate throughout the most of the album. So we will obviously be speaking about that a lot in this. What an interesting choice to go for something a bit more subtle, but lyrically so powerful, to literally start on a note of uncertainty. And obviously as we proceed through the album, we do eventually kind of like come to a conclusion, and she takes us on this journey of realizing something and taking action on something, which I think is so fucking smart. So overall, I love this intro. And although, yes, it's very different to the others, I think it's different in a very, very beautiful way. They're my thoughts on the intro. Let's move on to Bye, the next track. Now, straight away in this track, she's like, came to the conclusion, she's saying bye in a very fun way. She's like, it's very boy bye energy, right? I imagine obviously there were probably a load of uncertainty that came with making this decision, which obviously she'll get into. Trust and believe she does get into that in more tracks. But I think it's so interesting how she decided to go from this very uncertain place in the intro to straight away this like kind of pop smash anthem being like boy bye, like kind of a flippant chorus, for example. Like the chorus is very much just like bye, like very I don't give a fuck energy. But obviously delving into the verses, we obviously do get hints of like little things here and there. But yeah, just in general, I think it's very interesting that we're starting off with the goodbye, because I feel like most albums that kind of deal with the breakups, I think most of the time we find that they take us more through the realization to get to the goodbye at the end. Like they finally get into the point of being like, you know what, I'm good without you. I'm going to finally say goodbye. That's usually what we end with. So I think it's so interesting that she's decided to start with that. And obviously moving forward, we get into like kind of like a reminiscence and like the steps that she's had to take in order to be okay with the breakdown of our relationship, rather than dwelling on figuring out what was good for her and like what she actually wanted. She's like, most of the time, other than like obviously tracks where she'll reminisce and whatnot, we're talking about like kind of the aftermath and the moving on from, which I think is so cool. I will say it's got a very simplistic chorus, like I said. I think that does definitely lean into kind of like the no fucks given kind of energy. It's not my favourite chorus, I will say that. I think I really like the verses of this track. The chorus is fun, but I will say this song, low-key, gives me Sing vibes. You know the movie Sing? I think there's 2 movies now. I could see the elephant in Sing, because obviously I'm pretty sure she's played by Tori Kelly. I could definitely see her singing this song. I don't know why, but that's just what I have in my head. Like, especially on the chorus, I just see the elephant singing it. I don't know. I think there must be like a similar song that they've used in Sing that kind of gives this kind of energy, but who knows? Lyrically, the main part of this song that really got to me was verse 2. It covers a lot of ideas of like complacency within a relationship, which is nothing new, right? For example, like my sister, she was with someone for 6 years, and the only real reason for the breakup was complacency, comfort, no longer feeling like we're in a relationship. It's more like a friendship. Right? So I think that's really interesting. But what's even more interesting is in verse 2, she obviously mentions that this person realistically didn't necessarily think their actions would ever lead to her leaving. Like they got that complacent, they just couldn't see a world in which she would either be strong enough or just have the balls or just decide to leave. Like they got that comfortable that they were just like, oh, I can kind of be however I want to be. And she's realistically never going to leave me, because she sings, I'm stronger than I think, one. And then she also goes on to say, didn't think you'd lose me. Now it's too late to choose me. So fucking good. Oh my God. There's obviously a sense of empowerment there, and like choosing to do what's right for you and just following through with it. And I feel like she also finally realizes that it's better to go through the difficulty of ending the relationship than staying in this very complacent, comfortable situation that necessarily isn't serving her, which, like I said, is nothing new. We've heard it before, but I love the way it gets across this kind of idea. And the last kind of lyric that I feel like encapsulates that feeling very well is, now it's certainly bittersweet. This hook feels too hard to sing, but it's better than repeat, repeat. So fucking sickening. That literally just encapsulates the whole thing. Like, yes, we can feel in two minds about a situation, but at the end of the day, we know that this is what is needed to happen. No matter how difficult and how much, realistically, it is easier to stay in a comfortable situation, and that's why so many people do for a long time. I'm sure you all know people, and I know people that like stay in marriages because they have kids, they have a house, they have all these things that just make it so, like, choosing to do something that's going to better yourself and you feeling like you do deserve better, which was kind of hinted at in the intro. Like, I imagine, obviously I've never been in a marriage and I've never been in like a really long-term relationship, but I imagine like that's a big fucking step to take, being like, you know what, I am going to throw away, because I'm sure that's what it feels like I am going to throw away this long-term thing that has been good before, but it's not good now. Like, that is such a poignant choice to make, and I think she definitely chose that. She chose herself in this situation. I think that's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. That's by. I like it. It's definitely a great track. Definitely a pop moment. Definitely fun. And I think, given like kind of the deep aspects of the verses, I think the poppiness is definitely needed. But that kind of goes for a lot of these songs, guys. I'm not going to lie. There's a lot of these songs that are very deep lyrically, but given the nature of the production, I feel like it kind of just... It helps the album still feel quite light, in my opinion, because this, like, with the lyrics of most of this album, this could be a very devastating album. But I think it was smart of her to like choose to have a lot of these like up-tempo R&B-ish moments, you know? So we're not all just going to be crying all the way through. But anyway, moving on to Don't Want to Break Up Again. Now, this one lyrically is buck fucking wild. I feel like we kind of skimmed the surface in Bye. This track is the first one that we really start getting into the nitty-gritty, and she becomes very, very honest. So, for the most part, I see this song as a very much like reminiscence of actions that were made by this person that obviously led to her realizing this comfortability and ultimately deciding that this is no longer right for her. Obviously, linking it back to the title, I feel like she's not wanting to break up again. And she doesn't necessarily say this, I don't think, like outright, but the way I'm kind of interpreting this would be she's not really wanting to break up again because there is this like pressure when you're in a relationship that if that relationship does end, it's almost seen as a failure, you know? And I feel like that's something that is placed upon everyone, regardless of age, gender, and everything. That I feel like whether you're in I assume a marriage is something entirely different, because obviously you've decided to fucking sign a contract to say that you'll be with each other forever. So I imagine there's a certain level of being like, fuck, I really don't want to break up again because I know how people are going to see this. Like, I know how this is going to be like shown on a public level, because obviously she's a fucking celebrity, so that's not going to be easy either, you know? Everyone's got their opinions on everything anyway, so I imagine just all these feelings are just heightened. That's where I sit in terms of like the title. One thing that I kind of relate this to is, do you know in Friends when Ross has his whole fucking mental breakdown in like an episode or a few episodes when it comes to like his marriages, like he's not willing to have 3 failed marriages. I feel like that that is just where my brain went when I was listening to this song. Just because I feel like that encapsulates everything I've just mentioned about like it being seen as a failure rather than the complete opposite. And it's actually like kind of sickening. Like you're choosing yourself in this. Like it should be kind of like an empowerment thing, but I don't feel like on a grand scheme it ever really is feeling like that. That's how I'd see it, and that's how I do see it. Like with my sister, for example, like I mentioned it again, like when she got out of her 6-year relationship, like I didn't see that as a failure. I saw that as like a powerful choice that she's decided to choose herself and not stay in a situation that isn't benefiting her anymore. But like not just her, like the partner, like we're both in this together, and I'm sure we can both sense that this is no longer the same, you know? So I see it as a powerful thing, but I imagine, actually I know, I can tell you for sure people don't, you know? Now, to break down some of these lyrics, verse 1 is fucking bonkers, and like I've watched a few reactions of other people's thoughts, right? And this is always a lyric that gets everyone on their soapbox, and I'm going to be the same here. The whole fall asleep crying, him turning up the TV, what the fuck do you mean? You know? Like that is absolutely bonkers behavior. Like I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that to like a friend or even an acquaintance, let alone someone I'm in a fucking relationship with. Like that is a certain level of disrespect, if you ask me. Your partner is falling asleep crying and you're like, I don't even want to hear this bitch no more. I'm turning this shit up. That is crazy. That's a level of disrespect and just like, there's just a lack of empathy there, and I can't get over it. And that just shows that like they just really weren't on the same page within this relationship. Like, how are you going to tell me that you're so unbothered by your partner going to sleep crying that you're going to just, you know, continue and even just indulge even more in whatever you're doing? Fucking crazy. I do also just think in general, like this definitely links back to previous tracks, kind of hinting at complacency and comfort, obviously. In terms of lyrics, one that really stuck out for me, and I don't know if this is going to be like a universal thing, but the whole her saying like she's too much for this person, linking this back to obviously what was mentioned in the first verse about her going to sleep crying and him realistically not caring. Like I thought maybe does this kind of mean that this person may think that she's too emotional or she like feels things too deeply, which is a very sad thought. And I feel like that once again just kind of like continues this whole theme of just a lack of understanding of each other. And in terms of like a production choice, the whole like repetition of don't, like I'm pretty sure she repeats it 4 times before we get into the chorus. I feel that really is driving home this sense of like almost trying to convince herself that she shouldn't do something. Like I really don't want to do it. And it almost shows that like it really was like this last resort. The repetition just like speaks volumes in my opinion. I know it's something so small, but it really mattered to me, that little part. So yeah. Now in verse 2, she obviously starts speaking about the fact that like the work and the trying to make things work and working on yourself in relation to the relationship was very much one-sided. Like I'm pretty sure she speaks about her going to therapy and like taking all these steps to try and make things work, right? Like when problems arise, like she's not just sitting and letting them just fester. Like she's actively trying to work on a marriage or whatever this is. I'm pretty sure she's speaking about a marriage, but like I said, I don't want to speculate. But I'm pretty sure that's what it is. And then obviously, yeah, she obviously speaks about how this was completely one-sided and this person didn't try at all. Now, the bridge of this song I find very, very interesting, and I love this bridge because it's very much a sense of like wanting to make it clear to us, the audience, whatever, and even to herself, and like just reinforcing the idea that this is just her having to put herself first. Like she holds no malice for this person. She hopes they don't do the same. Like she literally says, I'm pretty sure, we both know it's time we say goodbye, just a kiss goodbye with tears in our eyes. Hope you won't regret me. Hope you still think fondly of our little life. Like she's like she still has fondness for this person, which I think is such a bigger person move to have, you know? Like so often when we break up with someone, it's so easy to like just despise them and kind of blackball them in our minds because it is easier. And obviously we're going to get into themes of that soon, so that's something to note. But yeah, I think the bridge of this song is so beautiful. And like the vocal approach, I'm sorry, the vocals so far the whole way through, I mean, realistically, no one's shocked. Ariana Grande knows how to use those vocals, right? But there is notes on the vocals coming up, right? So just bear with. I feel like overall, this song definitely leans into this idea of learning your boundaries, learning what you'll allow. Like, you could, like, realistically, us as people can only take so much. And I feel like in this track specifically, she's like, I really don't want to do it, but you've almost left me no choice. Like, I can't keep doing this. Even though I really don't want to do it, I really don't want to be doing this. At the end of the day, like, if I'm going to have any respect for myself, I've got to, you know? Love it. Love that idea. And the last note I had was the whole situationship thing, the whole situationship wording in this track. Very interesting, because realistically, we know situationships as something that kind of lacks this like emotional connection. And I feel like we have hinted at this this emotional disconnect between the two of them in previous tracks, and also this track, like kind of her feeling like she's too much for this person, and like the whole she goes to bed crying, he turns up the TV. Like there's definitely been a lack of connection and emotional connection here. So I think that's so interesting that she decided to state this relationship as a situationship, because maybe that's how she feels, or that's how she's been made to feel because of his actions. I don't know, that's just an interesting thought that I had. Next track, well, obviously it's just Saturn Return interlude. Obviously this is just speaking. This is just like a chatting moment. As far as interludes go, it really holds a great purpose because, I mean, first of all, I love the idea of like the Saturn returning and all this kind of thing. I think it's so fun. I've been hearing about it a lot recently because I listened to Casey Musgraves' first single from her upcoming album, which I'm pretty sure comes out next weekend. So, I mean, let me know if you'd like me to do like another deep dive for maybe Casey's album, because I mean, Deeper Well, that was a beautiful song, and I did a whole episode kind of based on that. So yeah, but she kind of spoke about this idea of Saturn returning, and I started doing a bit of a deep dive into kind of what a Saturn return is and what it means and kind of like how it affects us, whatever. So I had an idea of it before going into it. And obviously Ariana's been speaking about it a lot in interviews and stuff. So I love the idea of this whole Saturn return and like this changing yourself, and rather than it being strictly about like cutting toxic people out of your life, because I feel that's how a lot of times it can come across. She spoke about it quite a lot in her Zane Lowe interview. She says something along the lines of like she wasn't listening to herself, and she also states that like that was kind of the most important part of this whole experience for her. Like she wasn't necessarily focusing on, like I said, the cutting out of toxic people, and obviously yes, that happens, and that I feel like innately putting yourself first and like listening to yourself is going to have those kind of repercussions, you know. I was happy to hear that like she was kind of focusing on herself, because that's who it should be about. And I feel like even just like her saying that in the interview, that also then straight away relates back to don't want to break up again, and this idea of Saturn returning, and rather than it being about the other people, it's about you finding your boundaries and still having fondness for these people, but just acknowledging that they're not what's best for you, right? And that just relates to the bridge in that song so super well. But yeah, overall, it's a cute interlude. I really like it as an interlude, and I think for people that didn't really know what a Saturn return was, I think that really helps people understand kind of like a lot of like the lyrics and stuff in the album and the themes and stuff that we're going to hit on, especially moving forward. So yeah, I really like it as an interlude. Obviously, it's just a little bit of a speaky moment, but I appreciate it nonetheless. Now, let us move on to the title track, Eternal Sunshine. Now, what a track it is, okay? I fucking love this track. Eternal Sunshine, boots. First of all, I think the production is incredible. I love myself an R&B moment. This is definitely leaning more into the R&B-ness. I think lyrically, perfect title track. I feel like it encapsulates the whole idea of the album, and obviously it relates back to Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind and the idea of wiping your memories of a person or a relationship to make it easier to move on because the breakup wasn't easy. The whole theme of the album is encapsulated in just this one song, so I think it's so perfect that this is the title track. Incredible work. I will say though, now I'm kind of jumping ahead here, I think thematically in the lyrics and stuff, I'm surprised that this isn't the one that we had the single, like the visual for. Like obviously if you've seen the visual for We Can't Be Friends, Wait for Your Love, I feel like, now we'll talk about this more when we get to that track, I feel like lyrically, this song would have made more sense to have that kind of visual, right? Because that, like, the visual tells this story. So it's quite interesting to me that that track got the visual and not this one. And I mean, I've got thoughts about it, and we'll go into that when, like I said, when we get to the track. But that is just something that I wanted to note. And I feel like once again, obviously, it speaks about the idea of this breakdown of a relationship, but also the potential start of another. Maybe I'm reading into this wrong, but I mean, she does say, I found a good boy and he's on my side. Does this link back to the interaction that we had at the very beginning, you know? This interaction that she's been thinking about for 5 weeks. Interesting. Because she's kind of speaking about all these things that was missing, and she's found a good boy and he's on her side. And if we know anything from the past few tracks, it's that this person that we were with was definitely not on our side. There was definitely a disconnect there. Interesting thoughts. I feel like she also acknowledges in this track, which is something that we're going to get a lot of moving forward in the next few, the public perception of it all, and kind of this idea of how everything gets misconstrued very easily, especially in the media, right? We see it all the time. She sings, I don't care what people say, we both know I couldn't change you, I guess you could say the same, can't rearrange truth. This is the thing. Once again, in my opinion, that's reaffirming this whole, it was kind of always going to happen. It wasn't just like that he was bad for her. She's acknowledging that also she just wasn't the right fit for this person. But obviously she's the one that's made the steps to put herself first. And obviously, who knows? But I imagine she's thinking, well, I'll take these steps, and ultimately this is also going to benefit you. Because not only are you bad for me, I'm just not what's right for you. And I think it's really cool that she's acknowledging that this is a two-sided thing. He needs somebody else. He needs someone that isn't maybe as emotional, or doesn't feel things as deeply, or isn't too much, whatever the fuck that means. She also talks about him being a compulsive liar, and quite frankly, can't fucking stand that shit, right? She says, like, she's never known anyone lie like he does, and I'm sorry if this is in relation to her marriage, that's fucking bonkers. Why are we lying in a marriage? What are we lying about, good sir? You know? There should be no lies in a marriage. Anyway, the separate scenes part, now she says, like, now we play our separate scenes, she's in my bed, blah, 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 this whole thing. Like, I've seen a few reactions where people kind of get that whole thing muddled up and like get a bit confused by that. And it did take me a second, because I was like, why is she in your bed? But I was like, wait, she's speaking about how, like, she's in her bed because her bed was the bed with him, you know? And I think that's a very cool way of putting it. And in general, this whole part is kind of just like her talking about how they've both moved on. Like, it's not just her moving on, which I feel like if we are going to relate it to kind of like the things that we were seeing in the media, obviously everyone was very much focused on Ariana and what she was getting up to and what she was doing. So I feel like that little tidbit there could be like, well, actually, it wasn't just me that moved on. Like, he also moved on, like, maybe pretty quick. Like, we both got over each other very quickly, maybe. And then obviously to round up that part, she kind of just talk about how she wonders how it's going to end between them, which is guys kind of cunty, if you ask me, being like, it's kind of her being like, well, I kind of know it's going to end because he's clearly done no growth, which she's mentioned before. Like, he's not done any work on himself in order to be in a relationship like this. So, like, ultimately she knows it's going to end, but she's just wondering how it's going to end. Kind of cunty. The last thing I kind of want to talk about in terms of this title track specifically is this whole idea of the public perception of a relationship and how obviously when things come out it seems like such a rash decision. And obviously she has spoken about the fact that they had maybe some issues, there was a lack of connection. She had to kind of wrestle with herself with the idea of allowing this to end, you know? And I feel like so often we see this happen and we allow it to happen over and over and over, where we see a headline and we take it at face value and don't necessarily think about the fact that maybe there was problems happening for a while. Like that, maybe there was a gradual breakdown of the relationship. Like we see the headline and we just take it as like, oh, like that's it. They've nipped it in the bud so fast, you know? We don't generally stop to think about, especially in the media. Like, I'm not saying us as people, like, and as fans of Ariana, like, I'm not saying we necessarily think this, but I think the media kind of like make it look that way, that like things just like broke down so suddenly, because realistically what matters to them is not the story necessarily. It's getting the headline, it's getting the juice, it's getting people talking about it, you know? And then yeah, in general, the bridge and the outro of this one, once again, kind of like this switching, changing, like kind of bitty production, like jolty production, as it were. I feel like that lends itself so well to this idea of rewriting memories. In like a production sense, I feel like it emulates the lyrics so nicely in this whole like swapping, changing, can't shake this fate, rewrite. Maybe seeing all these outcomes, or all these trying to find all these ways of making it work, or seeing how all these things could have ended, and like just like rewriting everything and like trying to change all her memories and erase him and all this stuff. Like I feel like overall the bridge and both the bridge and the outro of this track encapsulate this feeling of wanting to erase someone and change memories in order to make it easier so well. And then the last thing I wrote is when she says Atari, I'm not going to lie, the first few times I listened to this song, for some reason I thought she was saying Atari. Now you play me like Atari. So that was interesting for me to have to go through. But no, I researched it, and an Atari is like a video game console kind of thing, I think. Overall, Eternal Sunshine, the track, very sickening. One of my favourite tracks for damn fucking sure. Okay? Moving on, Supernatural. I'm going to try and speed this up a bit because I've been going for a while already. First of all, it's a fucking smash, right? Supernatural is an absolute slam dunk. Incredible pop anthem. Okay? It kind of speaks about the maybe potential falling of a new person. Now, I'm sure we could maybe relate this back to like maybe her reminiscing to the beginning of their relationship and like maybe their beginning of their marriage, or like them getting to know each other. It could be about that, but equally it could also be talking about this new person that is so much better for us than the previous. But overall, it's an overwhelming feeling of love for a person, to the point where it feels like you have absolutely no control over it. Like I'm pretty sure she sings like, this love is possessing me and I don't care, or something. Like, she doesn't mind. Honeymoon phase boots, right? It's as a track as a whole, it's very, very much just we're in a honeymoon phase and it's fucking sickening and I'm loving this person, right? Incredible vocals. Now, to delve into this whole vocal thing, in the Zane Lowe interview, she mentioned that she was very particular on this album with how she decided to use her vocals and like allow herself to belt. Because I'm pretty sure she said something along the lines of like she herself loves when people just like sing down, because we all do. It feels great. We love it, right? But she mentioned that she was very much specific and intentional with when she allowed herself to do so. And I think it's very interesting to think that this is the first track realistically on the album where where she allows herself to really go there, to really release. I actually re-listened to Bye after filming this, and actually that track is the first and only other track before Supernatural that she also does kind of flex. And I think it's interesting how both of these tracks are ones where she's kind of accepted it and is kind of moving on, and she's feeling free and feeling happy. Kind of a surface level bop, if we're going to talk about it, like lyrically. But I will say I do love this idea of it being supernatural, because I feel like so far in the album we've had this very like space, futuristic, like these kind of elements in like the whole like Saturn returning and all that kind of thing. And this idea of rewiring your brain and erasing memories, because I don't think that can actually happen. So I like the fact that she chose to reference this feeling as feeling supernatural, because I just think it kind of like keeps it in the same wavelength. But yeah, overall, Supernatural is definitely a top tier track for me, but it is probably one of the more surface level bops that we've got on the album, which is not a bad thing, but it is just the facts. But anyway, moving on to True Story. Now, I'm not seeing enough hype about this track, in my opinion. Now, I've not really been on like Twitter or X or whatever, because that is the spawn of Satan. But I have been on like Instagram stories, and I've spoken to a few people that have listened to the album, and I'm just not hearing enough hype for True Story, Miss True Story Mama. I am obsessed with this track. And I think the run, specifically, from Eternal Sunshine all the way through to The Boy Is Mine, that 4-track run right there is impeccable, okay? First and foremost, Ariana did mention in the Zane Lowe interview that this is a true story based on untrue events, which I think is boots. I love that sentiment. She's like, this is a true story, but it's based on the untruths that you guys see as true. So smart. Guys, it's just incredible writing and incredible decisions that she's making. I do feel like this is a song where she's obviously once again acknowledging the public perception of what happened, or maybe what the public thought happened, and how people choose a narrative based on whether they like a person. I feel like that is a massive deal in the media these days. It's like, if a person likes a person, they're more likely to give them the benefit of the doubt. Whereas if they've already kind of wrote you off as a certain kind of person, they're kind of looking for any little thing that they can kind of like grab onto and be like, well, I told you that I knew that of her, you know? And I felt that was very much what happened here. She sings, "This is a true story about all the lies you fantasized about you and I. This is a true story about all the games I know you play." Now, Miss Thing was very smart here with this wording, I think, right? Fantasized. Obviously, we all know, now I've not listened to it. I think I listened to a little bit when I was writing these notes, just because I wanted to know kind of like the production of Fantasize the Leak, right? She mentioned this in the Zach Sang interview, that obviously Fantasize was a track that she wrote for a TV show or something, and it was kind of like a parody on a 90s girl group kind of energy. But obviously the fans people leaked it. I'm not sure if it was the fans or whatever, or fake fans. Someone leaked Fantasize. It went huge. People loved it. So she was like, okay, well, let me acknowledge it and then also give you something that kind of gives you that, right? Which we'll get to, which is obviously The Boy Is Mine. But I do think the fact that she wrote, "This is a true story about all the lies you fantasized about you and I," that's going to be a relation to the fact that the track leaked. It's got to be. Overall, the track is very much like her accepting to play the villain, the bad girl, whatever part these people want, for like entertainment purposes, because ultimately she knows that no matter the truth, people have made up their minds, which is kind of what I mentioned already. Like, people have kind of already wrote her off as a certain type of person. So her coming out and saying, no, that's not the truth. Here's the truth. Here's the receipts. There's always going to be people that are going to be like, well, no, I don't agree. I think you're faking that. I think that's bullshit. I'm still going to think of you in this way. So she's kind of like, you know what? If you're going to think that, I may as well indulge in it. You know, love it. Love, love, love. But at the end of the day, these people always still tune in. Okay, they're always there. They're some of your biggest fans in actual facts, okay? And I will say this is the first one that I feel like is a little bit of a bite back, but a very polite bite back. Like, I love the line where she says, I'll play whatever part you want me to whenever, and I'll be good in it too. Absolutely, yes, we will. Okay, she knows it. She knows it, and she knows her worth, and she knows what she'll do and what she won't. And that's that, and she'll be good at it. Okay? If you want to be the bad girl, oh baby, I'll be the baddest. You know? Love it. That is so fucking fun. Everything to me. I feel like, in general, kind of what we've seen with Ariana and this whole public kind of flipping and flopping on her, as it were, I feel like this is once again nothing new, but I feel like she is an example of someone in more of like this younger generation that is kind of getting that kind of treatment that we've seen before. The public and as the media in general, I feel like they love to see the downfall of somebody because it makes for great entertainment. And for example, two people that come to mind straight off the bat would be Britney Spears. Hello. They treated her like fucking dirt. And Lindsay Lohan, another great one. Because I feel like Britney Spears and Lindsay Lohan really did go through the trenches for a long time. But I feel like Ariana has been very much like hated or loved. Like, it's been very polarizing to the media and to the masses for a while. But she seems like such a wonderful human. It just kind of made me think of this wider thing that we see so often with women in music specifically, just being torn to shreds for our enjoyment. Not mine, because fuck that, but for a lot of people's enjoyment. It's very fucked, in my opinion. But even guys, just drama in general, we all love it. Like, something very like Gen Z here, but like the Jeffree Star, the Tati, the James Charles, Shane Dawson, that whole drama. Babes, people were tuned in. Same thing with the fucking Sister Squad, Dolan Twins, Emma Chamberlain. People love to see the drama. Why do you think there's drama channels everywhere? People thrive on the drama. It keeps things interesting. So I love that this track's kind of like leaning into that and being like, you know what? You like drama? I know you do. There's nothing I can say that would change your mind. So let me just indulge, baby. And yeah, I just feel like the vocals are very much indulgent, as well as the production, which kind of emulates this whole energy of giving into a narrative. Now, guys, moving on to The Boy Is Mine. Obviously, I mentioned True Story. Love that song, right? This song, the two of them together, working in tandem, very, very nicely done. Okay, now, as she kind of mentioned, I feel like The Boy Is Mine is definitely this kind of fantasized energy, and I did listen to a little bit of it, and I do agree it has that kind of thing. I'm pretty sure she was inspired by a song by, I think, someone called Brandy something. I can't remember her second name, which I also listened to a little bit of that, and I definitely see it. I definitely see the inspiration, so I love that. Guys, it's very horny, sexy, sluzzy, makes me feel like a whore. Right? When the production slows down, that's it, I'm loose. Okay? It's everything to me. Very early 90s, 2000s kind of girl group vibes, as she kind of mentioned. I definitely see that. I definitely catch that. Now, she mentioned in the Zach Sang interview, I gave them Ariana's version of that on the album, obviously when referencing Fantasize. She also said in the Zane Lowe interview, I'll play the bad girl, then there's this bad girl anthem referencing Boy Is Mine. And essentially this is just like an elevated version of that. And I definitely agree. It's very bad bitch, but I see it in more of a mature way. I feel like if you're gonna be a bad bitch and give us a bad bitch anthem, this is kind of how she was gonna do it while still remaining this very classy. Because I feel like this album in a whole is very classy. Like, she doesn't really get messy. She's everything just feels very intentional, and I like that about this project. And I kind of took this whole like The Boy Is Mine kind of thing as like, she realistically doesn't really care what people say because the boy is hers. And like, we saw how obviously like she was in Supernatural, for example. Like, she's falling, we're allowing it to happen. In fact, she's loving it, you know? So it's just like, why would I care? We've seen this also spoken about quite a bit. Like there's definitely Taylor Swift tracks that I could mention here, but I'm going to stop myself. Where she's obviously kind of referenced this whole like doing something even though she knows the public perception, but it's just what's right and what feels right. We love that. A very polite fuck you. Defo. I will say though, it's not totally unchecked on Ariana's side. I'd say like it's not completely out of touch being like, the boy is mine, so fuck you guys. Because in verse 2, for example, she does choose to acknowledge the fact that this was not something that was planned or whatever. And in actual fact, she would have rather it not happened, obviously, because no one's really going to want to go through a fucking breakup if they really didn't have to, you know? To relate it back to just like normal everyday life, like, why would anybody want someone to stay in a relationship that they're not being their best self in and like it's not serving them the best? Like realistically, I'd like to think none of us would want a friend of ours to stay in a relationship that isn't beneficial to either party just for the fear of like how it looks, you know? So I think it's kind of fucked up that people decide to weigh in on these kind of things, because realistically, like, why would you want someone to stay in that kind of situation? That's fucked up of you, you know? And this kind of sentiment of her acknowledging the fact that, like, she realistically didn't want this to happen is kind of continued into the bridge, I feel like, when she says, and I know it's simply meant to be, and I take full accountability for all these tears. Promise you I'm not usually like this. Shit, it's like news to me, but I can't ignore my heart, boy. Period. That right there, you can't force someone to stay in a situation that isn't serving them. There it is. We can't fucking help what our heart is saying, you know what I mean? So why would we want her to? That makes no sense to me. Like, why would anybody want her to stay in this kind of relationship? Bonkers. But moving on to Yes And. Obviously, this is a track that we know and have known for the longest. And this was obviously the initial single. Loved it as a single. Very good, like, house, pop moment. Definitely served purpose in terms of, like, a lyrical standpoint. I think it kind of relates back to this whole like carefree doing something to suit ourselves and not worrying about consequences kind of energy and just living your best life essentially. So lyrically, love. I will say though, now I think having heard the rest of the album, I might be alone in this, but I think Yes And is a little bit out of place sonically. I think from a lyrical standpoint, once again, fits perfectly. But I think this whole house poppy aesthetic, we don't really have any other kind of house elements on the album in my opinion, so it doesn't really make sense. But I'm pretty sure she mentioned maybe in the Zach Sang one that she wanted Yes And, oh no, I think it might have been in the videos that she released when she was like showing the reactions of like the people on her label and whatnot. She kind of wanted to release Yes And as like a precursor to the album, which I definitely think it did, but also as like, and the placement on the album kind of means that it kind of like gives us a lift in the middle. And I definitely think it gives us a lift, but part of me does think it's a little bit of an odd one out in the album as a whole in terms of the production. I would love to know your thoughts on that in the comments if you're watching this on YouTube, but that's just how I feel. But I did get to thinking where I might have placed Yes And if it was to stay on the album but wasn't where it was in the track list. I think, now this might be so stupid of me, but I kind of think it could have made a really cool last track on the album, like kind of encore vibes, you know? Like we have kind of like this emotional end, but then there's like one last track being like, you know what, like all this has kind of happened. I'm going to remain true to myself and I'm going to do whatever I feel like is correct. You know? I just feel like that could have been kind of fun because obviously it has like its kind of like long intro and like a big build up. And I just think it would have been like a fun, uplifting end, which could have been kind of cool. But I will say when we get to the end track, I am kind of glad that one is the ending, you know? But I do also have an alternative as to how the last track could have been altered to kind of fit within this whole like yes and being the last track kind of thing. But anyway, that's just the thought that I had, and maybe I'm stupid for thinking that. But I think in terms of like lyrics, like the whole everyone's tired, we're healing from somebody, keep moving, like what's next, so done with caring. Overall, great precursor to the album lyrically, for sure. Like I love the song, just not sure about it on the album. But anyway, moving on. We Can't Be Friends, in parentheses, Wait for Your Love. Now, the second single. And as I mentioned, I do think the visual was quite an interesting choice for this song, because realistically, the visual, in my opinion, tells the story of Eternal Sunshine, the track, / I'm sure it has themes of the movie, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Having said that, I do feel like this song has more of a cinematic, movie-esque feel. So it makes sense in that way that this would be the song that they'd choose to accompany the visual. But it does make me wonder if there was some sort of conversation there where she maybe wanted Eternal Sunshine, like the title track, to be the song that accompanied this visual, and maybe there was some sort of disconnect there, and like the label maybe decided something different, or maybe she just decided something different in general. I don't know. It's just an interesting one to me. I'd love to know your thoughts on that too. Overall, another pop smash. I will say, lyrically, it's definitely a return to public perception, in my opinion. I've seen a few people trying to relate this to a relationship, which I definitely could see at like a surface level, because she's obviously saying like, I'll wait for your love, whatever. We can't be friends. Like I can see how those parts could be taken in a way of like, we can't be friends. Like I'm breaking up with you and we can't remain friends, that kind of thing. But in my opinion, it's definitely public perception based, and her kind of saying like, I'm kind of gonna allow this storm to pass, as it were, and I'm gonna wait until you love me again. Because like I kind of mentioned, I think like it's been very like an on and off thing with Ariana Grande for a while, I think. Sometimes the media loves her, sometimes they don't. It's very odd. Like she literally mentions, you cling to your papers and pens, wait until you like me again. Like I feel like that, even just as a sentence, says everything it needs to say. Now, verse 2, I fucking loved verse 2. Very much this idea of her living with this metaphorical truth, like as if this truth was another person. She kind of says like, me and my truth, we sit in silence. What's the word? There's like a word for when you like give like something human emotion. I can't remember what it is. I learned it in English in school, but I can't recall. But it's kind of sad how like she feels that she was literally in this thing totally on her own and that no one else cared. So like it was just her sat there with her truth, like to keep her company. Like that is really devastating. And on top of that, like this whole idea that, I mean, I have felt, obviously not on the same level because no one's coming for me like they are fucking Ariana. I'm not trying to say that. But there is this kind of feeling of when people are trying to make you out to be a certain kind of person and misconstruing, is it misconstruing or misconstrue? I'm not sure. Like twisting your words essentially to try and create a narrative that they see fit. There is this like two sides of you that feel, one, I don't want to let them do this. Like, I know me. I want to defend myself. But then also this other side that's very much, I don't want to feed into this drama and this narrative because it's only going to make it worse. So although I'm no Ariana Grande, obviously, I feel like anyone that puts themselves out there on a public platform, I'm sure they can relate to this feeling. I will say, once again, talking production, when the silence hits. Now, we've seen this a few times. It's not a new thing where obviously we speak about silence lyrically, silence hits. We always love it. It always feels good. It's like a good itch to scratch, you know? That's right, isn't it? Yeah. But what I noticed about this kind of silence is it kind of feels, because it's not total silence. There's like a little bit of like a distant thing happening. And it kind of made me think about, in relation to what she said before about her and her truth, like sitting in silence, like her kind of feeling like she's on the outside looking in on all this fucking shit that's happening and she's sat there on her own. I feel this silence atmosphere that is created it almost feels like you're sat on the outside of a party, like kind of watching something, or like imagine you're in the toilet of a club or outside a club and you can like hear the music happening, but you're still on the outside just kind of looking in. I don't know, guys, there's something there that I really liked. Now, once again, that might be a reach, but I really liked that. This thought of like her feeling like an outsider while all this stuff is being said about her and she's not able to have her say because she knows that it'll just make it worse. Now, specific lyrics that I love would be, "You got me misunderstood, but at least I look this good." The reason why I like it so much is because I feel like amidst the rest of this track that is kind of just like her feeling alone, shit's hitting the fan, her not being able to say anything, I do still like the fact that she's able to be like, but I'm still kind of thriving in my own way. Like, I'm still going to allow myself to continue on this path that I know is good for me, you know? I just like the fact that she's just like, but at least I still look this good. Like, I don't really give a shit at the end of the day what you guys are going to say because she knows herself. Love it. I also really like, "I don't like how you paint me, but I'm still here hanging." What an incredible line that I'm going to delve into in depth here, right? Okay, I read into this one a bunch. Because realistically, in my brain, this says she doesn't like how she's being painted publicly, but she's still here hanging, meaning that she's still putting herself up for like this judgment and like this scrutiny. Like, she's not allowing this to mean that she has to fade into obscurity. She's fading away from the public eye. To do what I love, I have to take the fact that you're gonna paint me in a bad light. But I'm going to still be here hanging and allow you to do so because it means that I'm still able to do what I want to do and be the person that I want to be. And the last line that I think was really cool is the whole "I feel so seen in the night." Because at face value, that could just be easily a flippant little moment. But the way I took it, because I like to be extra, it got me to thinking that maybe she's relating this to obviously the spotlight and how when she's out of the spotlight, she feels like she's more seen for the person that she is because there's nothing there for people to critique and overanalyze. Like, she's able to be her real, authentic self, obviously, when she's out of the spotlight and out of the public eye. And realistically, she's more understood because there's nothing for people to come at her for because they can't see her. They physically cannot see her. I also think this could relate to how she feels more seen for the person that she is by the people around her when she's not having to play Ariana. Do you know what I mean? Like, she kind of mentioned this in an interview, I'm pretty sure, about obviously the experience of playing Glinda and having to kind of strip away Ariana. And it's kind of made her realise that there is quite a difference there in terms of like who she is when she's this pop star and then who she's able to be outside of that, you know? But yeah, that's another one. It's just another great track. Guys, I feel like I'm a broken record at this point, but yeah, it is what it is. Moving on to "I Wish I Hated You." Okay, fuck me up. This song hurts a lot. This song is probably, in my opinion, both lyrically, production-wise, probably the saddest song on the album. And I feel like this is also a very relatable topic because she's obviously speaking about this whole wishing you hated a person because it would be so much easier to get over them and move on and break up. I've seen it so many times where, like, why would I leave something that realistically isn't that bad? Like, there's nothing that bad happening. The person isn't treating me so bad to the point where, like, I'm forced to leave. Like, it's not like this person's cheated on you, none of these things, you know? I know I felt like this. My most recent relationship, which was 6 years ago, right? He obviously broke up with me. I didn't choose it for reasons that he saw fit, but it was one of those situations where the reasons, in my opinion, weren't that vast. Like, it kind of came down to this whole, like, him just not feeling the same way about me anymore. That's what I took it as anyway. So I've definitely felt this, and it is a real difficulty to handle because it's so much easier to hate someone, and I'm sure we all know this. Now, after the past few songs that have been a little bit more upbeat, a little bit more public perception based, I feel like this is the first one that we get back into this whole reminiscing on what the actual outcome of ending this relationship was and how we're feeling since. For example, in verse 1, she kind of speaks about dealing with the reality of moving on, with the idea of getting rid of belongings that still are existing in a space that they also used to occupy with you, which I'm sure is a really rough experience. Now, I've never had that, but I kind of relate it to like pictures on your phone and how I'm straight on my phone deleting them as soon as something ends. It's just the way I am. I know some people aren't, but that's the way I am. But once again, kind of like linking it back to a previous track where we speak about holding on to the fondness of the person and like not allowing the fact that it's ended ruin everything, because realistically there's always good parts within a relationship. Like, that's why you were together in the first place, you know? She sings, I rearrange my memories, I try to rewrite our life to make it easier to move on. And the way I took this little section is looking back on situations, trying to almost find problems to justify something. Because, like, for example, guys, I've done this many times and still do. Like, I look back on my breakup with my previous ex and I kind of think, were there things here that kind of alluded to him cheating on me? Did he move on a bit too fast? Like, all these kind of things to try and justify a reason for a breakup a bit more, because I did kind of find his whole reason for the breakup a little bit stupid and invalid. But yeah, so I imagine like that's kind of where we're at, is like we're trying to rewrite things and rewrite scenarios to paint this person in a worse light, and then it's easier to get over them. She also mentions that she learns to keep herself in one place, which I feel like is kind of allowing herself to stand still, feel the feelings, because she seems like the kind of person, maybe, and I know people that are like this, and I'm also like this, where you kind of like make yourself busier. We see it all the time in like media and everything. Like, people throw themselves into work and stuff to like take their mind off of like other bullshit that's happening in their private life. And I feel like that's kind of what that's getting at, is like she's going to allow herself to stay in one place, and she's had to learn to do that, because yes, it's not easy. It's not easier to stay still and feel the feelings, but ultimately we've kind of got to be able to move on healthily. And this is definitely a thing that was spoken about in Noah Cyrus's song Stand Still, which I'm pretty sure is like her first track on her album. And it's the same thing of like, I need to stand still every once in a while to really make sense of everything that's happening and to feel my feelings. And I think that's so beautiful. I do think this song is a little bit too short, in my opinion. That I would have loved this to be a bit longer. But having said that, if I'm going to relate this to the video, right, which I don't need to, but I'm going to, because obviously the last track had a video. I feel like if we're going to think about it like that, this song feels a bit like a limbo, like the after effects of, sonically I'm talking here, right, the kind of production vibes. It feels like an extension of the last track, in that everything was happening in the last track. They were rewiring our brain, erasing these memories, doing all this shit to our brain. I feel like production-wise, because it's very simplistic in terms of production, I feel like we're kind of floating. And it's kind of like the aftermath of going through something really traumatic, which obviously can relate just in general to going through this breakup, right? But in terms of the video, I feel like it's kind of like getting used to this new feeling, almost. I just really liked it, and I liked thinking of it in that way, because it felt very dreamy to me. And I just think in general, after the last track being quite cinematic and like intense and like huge, I feel like this one being a bit more peaceful and like dreamy and limbo like, I just really like the two together. I think it really works. So once again, big tick for placement on the album for sure. And then finally, in terms of lyrics, she sings so close, and obviously we have the echoes happening at the same time, but I'm not going to read all those out. But she sings so close and yet so far, if we only had known from the start. Once again, kind of alluding to this whole thing being kind of fated, that this realistically was never going to end well. We never really were what was best for each other. We were never that compatible. Allowing that just to be what the case was, you know? Like, I'm pretty sure in an earlier track I mentioned that she spoke about a similar thing, where acknowledging that, like, although he's not what's best for her, she's also not what's right for him either. Like, this is not just a one-way thing, and I really like that also. I don't think it's always good to place blame on just one person when it's like an organic breakdown of a relationship. Like, if they've not done anything that bad, it's just an incompatibility. And I think it's fine to just allow that to be the reason, you know? But anyway, moving on, second to last track, Imperfect for You. This is very clearly a love song, right? Very clearly a love song. The title alone, Imperfect for You, there's two meanings that I kind of saw for this. One, I think is incorrect. One, I think I'm really on the money, to be honest. So obviously, it's imperfect for you. I was kind of talking about how potentially she felt the public saw it, because I know if we are relating it to what was happening in the public at the time, which I think we are, there was a lot of talk of like her being not what's right for him in this instance, which I think is really fucked up of people to even say when you don't know these people, but whatever. So there is that in my brain. I'm like, okay, maybe that's also something here, but that's the one where I'm like, that might be a bit of a reach. But in the same way, I love how in the word imperfect, there's I'm perfect, right? And I feel like she's saying, although people think that she's imperfect for him, she feels like she's perfect for him. Or, now this is the one that I feel like I'm a bit more on the money with, right? This one makes more sense in my brain. The other one was definitely more of a reach, but I want to keep this in here. I feel like she's imperfect for him because they're both imperfect. None of us are perfect. We're all human beings. We're all flawed. And I feel like she kind of mentions in the song that she's imperfect for this person, but that's good enough for this person. Like, they don't need her to be perfect, because why would you need someone to be perfect? I don't need anyone to be perfect, because I'm definitely not perfect. I've got many flaws. Okay? For example, she's able to embrace being fucked up, anxious, too much. But because this new person potentially doesn't necessarily care about those things, she doesn't necessarily think those things of herself anymore. Obviously, within that, she did mention too much. Now, this is something that I grasped onto, right? Realistically, what did we hear at the very beginning of the album? That she felt like, or she was being made to feel like, she was too much for this person in this past relationship, right? Very interesting that now she's like, I used to feel fucked up, anxious too much, but I haven't felt like that since I've been with you. And then the way the lyrics are fucking set up, where it's like, she says at the very beginning, she used to be like this. In the second time she sings it, he used to be like this. And at the very end, she's like, we used to feel like this, but we're both going to be there for each other, kind of vibe. Love these slight changes in lyrics. It always keeps it fresh and interesting. And I think that's why I love this song so much. Because realistically, he used to feel these same things, but because we both used to feel the same things, and we're not holding each other to a standard of which we need to be flawless, it allows us both to not feel like that anymore. We're both accepting of each other's flaws, and that's okay, and that's beautiful. You know, I just love it. On top of that, I feel like, in general, this person has changed her for the better in her eyes. Like, all her habits and tendencies aren't the same now. For example, she says, let's leave our baggage and wine at the table. Baggage, obviously, we all have heard this been used a lot. People tend to use that as a word meaning trauma that they've experienced, or bad, negative times that they've gone through, whatever. So that's obviously nothing new. But I feel like, for example, wine. Now, I'm going to single out the word wine here, because usually we see people, in terms of wine, I feel like people use wine a lot to kind of take the edge off after a stressful time. For example, Adele, I drink wine. I'm taking the edge off. I'm indulging in a glass of wine at the end of a day. All this kind of thing, right? So I think it's very interesting that she's like, I can also leave the wine on the table. I can leave that behind, because realistically, since I've been with you, I don't need something to take the edge off. I don't need something to kind of like help me relax after going through shit, or to make me feel less anxious or fucked up, you know? Love it! Next track also references that, so bear with. And then last few things, the fact that she referenced this whole time as kind of being a happy disaster, the juxtaposition of those words makes me think like about, although maybe like it was turbulent in terms of like perception on this situation or whatever. Like for them it was like the happiest thing they could have done and like the perfect thing that they've done for each other, you know? So I think that's wonderful. And in general, I think with this track for me, the lyrics are definitely the strongest part. The production's not my favorite, but it's definitely not something that is like a negative in any way. I think it's, and I actually do think the more I've been listening to it, and after her live performances on SNL, because oh my fucking God, the live performances on SNL, I do find myself really loving this track now. We're now going to go on to the last track. I am sorry if this has been really long, but I don't know. I've just wanted to chat loads and I have gone in. But yeah, last track, Ordinary Things, featuring Nona. Her grandma, I'm assuming, or a nana, whatever. Very interesting ending sonically, in my opinion, right? Now, if we're going to talk about what I mentioned earlier in terms of yes and, I think Ordinary Things, the track, excluding Nona's part, could have been placed somewhere else. And I feel like Nona's part could have been just like a little outro. Because obviously we had his intro. I feel like it could have been really cool to have Nona's part as an outro. Maybe after Yes and. So if we did maybe Ordinary Things, the track, somewhere else. Not sure where. Maybe around Supernatural. Or to be honest, I don't hate it after Imperfect for You. Because I feel like it does kind of link to this whole like, since I've been with you, I don't feel this kind of way. I'm imperfect for you because none of us are perfect and you allow me to be imperfect. We can do whatever we want as long as we're together. I feel like they're very much linked. So I actually quite like that. But I feel like Ordinary Things could have been there, then Yes and then I think we could have closed with Nona's part at the very end as like an outro. That would have been really cool in my opinion. But in general, sonically very interesting in terms of an outro, but I get it, especially with the lyrics. The lyrics are really beautiful. I love the sentiment of, like I said, realistically, it doesn't matter what we do. We can do all these lavish, expensive things, or we could just chill. And I think that's the beauty of being in a relationship in general. And that's what I strive for in a relationship. I think it's some of the most beautiful parts when you're with someone isn't going all these places and doing all these crazy things. It's just spending time together. Like that's what it's supposed to be about, you know? So I love that about this track. Lyrics wise, she doesn't miss on this album, not once. So in general, it's very clear in this track that she's very much crazy in love kind of vibes. But if we're going to delve into one lyric, I did mention that there is a talk of wine again in here. And she says, you hit like the first sip of wine after a long day. To me, that relates straight back to Imperfect for You, confirming that she no longer needs to turn to wine to take the edge off because she has him. He hits like the wine used to, you know? Love. I just loved that little tie there. Loved it. But yeah, I think sonically it's a little bit of a letdown for an outro. I could have maybe seen this one being a bit more slow or a bit more like simplistic, kind of like how I Wish I Hated You was. But overall, I loved this as an outro. Nona's part, oh my fucking God. Nona comes in and answers the fucking question that we asked at the beginning, which I think is incredible. Full circle moment for sure. Love, like that's very much her tying this album up with a bow. Love it. Incredible. Nona did that, right? There honestly, I don't think could be any better advice given to anybody in the way of like, if you don't feel comfortable giving someone a kiss goodnight before you go to sleep, then quite frankly, you're in the wrong place. Get out. That is incredible. That is honestly one of the most perfect little voice note inserts I've seen in an album to date. Like, I think it's so perfect. But anyway, in general, I would just love to be on that level of love at some point in my life. I don't think I've ever felt that much. So I do look forward to that. But yeah, that's gonna wrap up a little track by track moment. In general, the project, I feel like this is definitely her most cohesive work yet, other than maybe Yes and, but that's to be determined. Obviously, maybe that'll change for me as I keep listening. But as of right now, Yes and does feel still a little bit out of place. I think it's a perfect mix of what we know from Ari so far. Like, I feel like it's got little hints of all the other albums, like R&B of like Positions and whatnot, and Thank You Next, and the like experimental parts and the futuristic parts of Sweetener, and like the really sweet and like beautiful parts of, say, like My Everything, and like Yours Truly. I think in general, it's a perfect encapsulation of all of her work so far, and I see it being a very timeless, classic album. That's just a hunch that I've got currently. And I think in general, the story's perfect. The placement for the most part is absolutely incredible. And yeah, I just love it. I love it a lot. This is definitely a contender for my favorite Ariana Grande album, for sure. And I didn't think that when I first listened, but the more and more I've delved into it, I definitely think so. But anyway, to close this I was going to say little episode. It's not been a little episode by any means, but to close up this episode, I'm going to give you my ranking as of right now, because that's going to be conducive to a healthy comment section, isn't it? We're going to start from 13. At 13, I've wrote Saturn Returns, the interlude, because it is just talking. Love it still, but realistically, it's not got the most in the way of like substance. I've then got 12 Intro, just because it is, once again, the intro. It's a beautiful intro, and I think it's a great precursor to the whole album, but it is just an intro. We've then got, I'm going to try and go a bit quicker, Ordinary Things featuring Nona, just because of the production. I don't know if it works necessarily that well for an outro. But yeah. I've then got Don't Want to Break Up Again. Bye is 9. 8 is Yes And. I was unsure where I was going to put Yes And. Like, that's kind of like a interesting one for me. 7, Imperfect for You. 6, We Can't Be Friends, in parentheses, Wait for Your Love. 5, I Wish I Hated You, which when I first listened to that song, I didn't expect it to be that high. So that's already grown a lot on me since my very first listen a few days ago. 4, True. Now, top 4 was really hard. All these could have easily been tied at number 1 for me, right? We've got True Story at 4, Supernatural at 3, 2, Eternal Sunshine, and 1, The Boy Is Mine. That's my ranking. This has been my first little long breakdown of an album, deep dive into an album, if you will. If you've enjoyed this episode and you've made it to this point, thank you so much, because this is not going to have been easy to edit or even get through for me. So yeah, let me know if you'd like me to continue doing these, because this seems like a really fun way of me like indulging a lot in music whilst also not having to worry about fucking copyright and tackling all that bollocks. So let me know if you'd like me to continue doing that, and if there's any albums that have obviously previously been released. Like, I'd love to maybe do it for Renee Rapp's album, maybe some Taylor albums, maybe some Lana albums. That would be so fun for some Lana albums. And obviously albums moving forward, if there's any albums that you'd love me to do a deep dive into, because I've really enjoyed myself here today. Now I've been recording for about 2 hours, so I am gonna go now. And yeah, I'll see you all soon. And if you are watching this on YouTube, please obviously subscribe, like, comment. I'd love to know your thoughts on the album, maybe a ranking of your favorites. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts or wherever else you get your podcasts, I would love if you would give me a 5-star review. That would mean the world. But otherwise, I'm gonna love and leave you, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye.